Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me back. We will start this lesson by learning about the null object. When and why to use it. This is one of the most important tools in After Effects, so I want us to learn about it separately. So save the project we are working on, Ctrl+S, close it, and open the After Effects file found in the main folder of the course you downloaded from me, called Class 0 Parent and Null. When you open the project, you see 6 lessons we will go through together. Before we learn about the null object, we need to understand how to link between layers and what that even means. Therefore, in the first lesson, we will understand what a basic parent is and how to use it. The parenting tool looks like this, a kind of spiral. If you don't see this icon, you can right-click here, go to Columns and check Parent and Link. For those working on the After Effects 2023 version, be careful not to get confused between the parenting icon here. This is a parenting of different track mats, which we will learn about later. We are referring to the icon that is here. Okay, so we have 3 layers, and each layer is called by a different name. One layer called the parent. It's the biggest square. If you move it, it will move separately from the other layers. If I move the other 2 layers, called child 1 and 2, they will also move separately. Now I want the 2 small squares to move together with the big square. I can go here and select the layer I want it to be associated with. Or just grab the pick whip of those layers and connect to this one. Now if I move the small squares individually, they will move without a problem. But when I move the big square, the small squares will move together with it. And this is called parenting. I can now rotate the large square, and the 2 small squares will rotate with it. It is important to remember that all squares rotate from the center because the anchor point of the large square is located in the center. If I place the anchor point of the big square down here, and now rotate it, then the 2 small squares will rotate together with it relative to the location of its anchor point. I will move the anchor point back to the center. Now let's get to the second lesson. Click here. We will talk about parenting during animation. That is when we have keyframes on the layers. So the blue square has a very simple scale and rotation animation. And the small squares have a simple left and right position animation. Let's see how it looks. So the big square makes one round, scaling up and down just as those squares move sideways. And now, let's see what will happen if we connect the 2 small squares to the big square, at the beginning of the timeline with parenting. Now they have a new motion that comes from the big square animation. I mean, now, they are both growing and moving around. In parenting during animation, it is important to remember at what point in time we parent the layers. I will explain. So I will cancel the parenting and do new parenting, not at this point in time, but at this point in time. Let's see how it looks now. Now the squares behave a little differently than before. And when I go back to the beginning of the animation, the position of the small squares looks different from what they were before I linked them to the big square. To get our scene back to normal, we need to get to the exact same point in time when we connected them. And only now to release the parenting. So remember, when we have an animation on the layers, it is very important to know at what point in time we connect the layers. Don't worry if the topic is still a bit confusing for you. We will do these actions again later. Let's move on to the next lesson, where we will learn about property parenting. But before that, let's do a little reminder from the previous lesson. Connecting the layers at the right time. So, as you can see, I have a composition that consists of several layers. There is a text layer here, a title, with a left to right position animation. And at the end of the composition, the text returns to where it was at the beginning. Now I want the black stroke to move along with the title. So I can create the same animation as the title, and then time them together. But as we have already learned, we don't have to do that. We can use parenting, and save a lot of time. What is important to remember is, knowing in which time code, we need to do the parenting. For example, if I parent this layer to the title when I am at this point in time, see what will happen. The stroke does move with the title, but not in the way I wanted. I will press Ctrl Z. And if I reach the right point in time, for example, when the title has already finished its animation, then I link the stroke to the title. Now it will move together with the text in an accurate way. And, of course, also return with it at the end. Let's move on. I'll close the layer here. And now I want to talk about parenting properties. Parenting can be done not only for the layers but also for the properties of the layers. I will explain. I have two layers here called Icon and Icon 2. I created it using the pen tool and set a stroke thickness to 5. There are also locked layers of blue and white backgrounds. Let's say those two objects must be in the same color throughout the project. And now, I was asked to change the color of the shape to red. So now I also need to reach the color of the stroke of Icon 2, and sample the red color I gave the shape. Many clicks for a simple operation. I will press Ctrl Z, and show you how we can do it more simply, with the help of parenting. First thing, I need to find the properties that should be the same. In our case, it is the fill color of this shape. So I'll open the content of this layer, go to the shape, and open the fill property. And in Icon 2, I will look for the color of the stroke. There are many other properties in the stroke, but I will refer only to the color of the stroke. So we have the fill color of this shape and the stroke color of this icon. Now I have to decide who will be the parent and who will be the child. It doesn't really matter. For now, I will decide that the color of the fill of this shape will be the parent, meaning every time I change this color, the color of the icon will change accordingly. As you can see, there is the parenting of the layer itself, and here additional parenting icon of the properties. So I'll take the stroke color of the icon and parent it to the fill color of this shape. And now, if I change the shape's color, the icon's color will change accordingly. I will paste the values of the color I chose before and click OK. I will close both layers. And now I can come at any other time in the project and change the colors of the layers together to any other color I want. Let's move on to the next lesson, chain parent, and try to figure out what that even means. We see a character, and with the help of this character, I will explain what chain parent means. As you can see, all the layers have names and are labeled with different colors. For example, all the layers referring to the left hand are colored blue, and all the layers referring to the right hand are colored purple. If I want to move this hand up and down, I have to find the layer of this part of the body, open the rotation parameter, and then rotate it. As you can see, this is not the result I wanted. The first reason is that the anchor point is not placed in the correct location. so I'll place the anchor point here. I'll go back to Selection Tool, and now the hand moves properly. I will press Ctrl Z. Now I want this part of the hand, a layer called Hand 2, to move along with it, and also this part, a layer called Hand 3. What I need to do is link all these parts together. So let's see how to do it. First I will link this part, a layer called Hand 2, to this part, a layer called Hand 1. Why exactly to this part? Because it is the part of the hand that the movement comes from. Therefore this part is the parent, and this is the child. So I'll take the pick whip and link this layer to this layer. Great! Now everything is moving as it should. And here, if I want this part of the hand to move correctly, I will have to place the anchor point here as well. So again, I'll take the anchor point tool and place the anchor point of this layer here. I'll check how it turned out. Not so good. The anchor point should be placed here. Now if I rotate the hand, it will rotate properly. And if I rotate that part will move accordingly. I'll press Ctrl Z. And now, I have to link the last part of the hand, a layer called Hand 3. So we have already learned that for the hand's movement to be correct, it is better to place the anchor point in the correct location. What is important to understand in the principle of the parent chain is that now this part of the hand, a layer called Hand 3, I will link to this part of the hand, a layer called Hand 2. And not to this part of the hand, a layer called Hand 1. That is, we connected the hand parts in the form of a chain. This allows me to move the hand correctly. And if I move the character's body, as you can see, the hand does not move with the body. I have to link layer Hand 1 to the layer of the body, because this is the layer on which the other parts of the hand are linked. So I'll take this layer and link it to a layer named Body. Now if I move the body, the hand will move with it. The body became the primary layer, the parent. This part of the hand became a primary child. This part became a secondary child, connected to the primary child. And this a third child, connected to the secondary child. And that's what's called a chain parent. Later we will learn how to rig a character more professionally, in one of my courses, called Motion Design for Social Media. In this course, we will create a short motion design video for an app. For now, I'm just using the character to explain the parent chain principle. Let's move on to the next lesson and learn what a null object is. So let's get in here. What we see here is a simple animation of the numbers. Now if I open the grid, I will see that the numbers are not exactly in the middle of the frame. If I try to move the numbers around, I'll ruin the animation by creating unnecessary keyframes. Remember, the layer must not be moved once it has a position animation on it. I will delete these two keyframes. This is where the null object comes to help me. Right-click on the gray area here, go to New, and select the null object. The null object is an empty layer, which I do see here in the preview, but I won't see it in the final rendering. This means I won't see those lines in my video after I render it. It's great for us, because we don't have to worry about the visibility of this thing. Now I'll select these two layers and parent them to the null object I just created. Now I will select the null and move it wherever I want, without destroying the animation of the numbers. Even if I move here, nothing will happen. I can also open the scale of the null and increase it, and the numbers will increase together with it. I can now continue to place the numbers wherever I want. Now let's move on to the last lesson and see how we can improve our animation using the Null Object. So there are several layers here. A text layer that has a scale animation on it. There are two shapes here that have a position animation on them. This shape enters from this side, and this one enters from here. And here is the face of the character we worked on earlier. And this is how the animation looks all together. And now, I want to give this whole scene a scale feel. Let's see what I mean. First, let's close all the layers by pressing the U key. One more time, U. And now, let's create a new null object. So, right-click here on the gray area. New. Null Object. The null is created in the center of the frame, which is great for us. So now I'll take all the layers I want to scale. I don't want to scale the background, so I won't select it. And now, I'll link all these layers to the null. I will open the scale of the null, and as we saw before, all the layers we connected on it will scale accordingly to the null. I'll press Ctrl Z. Let's see what would happen if we parent the layers to the null when the null was located here. Now, if I increase the null, we will notice that the layers will increase from where the anchor point of the null is. That's why it's very important to link the layers only when the null is positioned in the right place for you. So when the null was in the center, it was excellent. So I will link all the layers to it again when it is placed in the center. And now, with the help of this null, I will add another animation to the whole scene. I can create keyframes to the scale parameter, that at this point in time, the size of the null will be 100, and at the end of the animation, the scale of the null will be 150. This way, the null will start to grow from 100 to 150. Let's see how it looks together with the whole scene. So as you can see, while the whole scene moving, we added an additional scale animation without us going through and scaling each layer one by one. Imagine if we had done it without the null. We would have had to animate a scale for each layer, and this layer already has a scale animation, so that would have put us in a problem. Luckily for us, the null solved the whole problem for us. More than that, I can add more animation to the null. For example here, when all the objects are already on the screen, in the second one. If I open the keyframes of all the layers, I see that all the layers have already finished their animation. So I'll open the rotation parameter for the null. I'll create at this point in time a keyframe, and after 2 seconds, at that point in time, I'll tell the null to make one rotation. And then, I can select those keyframes, I'll change them to easy ease, and then I'll double-click one of them while holding the Alt key. Here I'll change the velocity of the keyframes to 85 and 85. And now I have both scale and rotation on all layers. I will press Shift S to display the scale parameter as well. And that's basically how we use the null when we have an animated scene that consists of several layers. So that's all we need to learn about the null object and parenting. And now, I want you to save this project. And now, go to File, Open Project. Go to the folder you created for the course and open the After Effects file you created, called Class 0. Great, so we went back to our lesson, and now I want to use what we learned about parenting, and link the properties of several layers. Notice that these two dots are designed the same. Both have a stroke. We can link these two properties. I'll close the layer here real quick. And now I will open the stroke properties of these two layers. I'll get a little closer to see what I'm doing. Here is the stroke. I will open its properties. I will also open the properties of the stroke here. As you can see, there is a property here called stroke width, which is exactly what is here. And of course, this layer also has its own stroke width. So I can link the stroke width of this layer to the stroke width of this layer. Now if I change the thickness here, the thickness will change automatically in the second layer as well, because it is linked to this one. You can also see that the property is colored in red now, which means that this property is linked to something. We can also link the color if we want. So I'll take this pick whip and link it here. And now, if I change the color here, the color will also change in the second layer. I will press Ctrl Z and close the layers. Notice that to get to the property I wanted, I had to open a lot of parameters. Instead of doing this, I remind you that we have a search bar here, with the help of which I could find the property I want. So I will select the two layers and write stroke in the search bar. After Effects will show me the stroke properties of these two layers. I could also write an ellipse. And now, it would show me the contents that are in these two layers. Great, let's move on. Now let's learn what solid is. As you know, the white background we see here is not a real background. It's just the color of the default background of this composition. The best way to create a real background is using a solid. So let's make one. You can create a solid in two ways. Right-click. New. Solid. Or we can use the shortcut Ctrl-Y. Now a small window of the settings of the solid will pop up. Here we can name the solid. Let's call him BG Loader. Press Enter, and we will see the solid here above all the layers. Move the solid under all the layers. Now I want to change the solid's color, according to our color palette. So I will click here on the Shade button to see all my layers. I will also select the layer of the palette as an isolated layer, so that I can see it together with all the isolated layers in my frame. Then I'll click the Shade button again, to hide all the layers back. Select the layer. And now, I will use a shortcut to change the solid settings. Ctrl-Shift-Y. It brings us to the settings of this solid again. So now I can sample the yellow color using the eyedropper tool, and press OK, or Enter. I will hide the palette from the frame. As you can see in the final animation, the background in this part disappears in a kind of flickering way. Let's create it together. First, let's open all the keyframes of all the layers. Make sure no layer is selected. And press the U key. So now I want to find the point in time where I no longer see the dots in the frame. At this point in time, they are already all out of frame. It's a good time to start the flickering animation for the solid. So to make it, I'll select the solid and open the opacity parameter. Press T. Let's make the layer invisible for a moment, and then we'll click on this icon to turn off the default background as well, so we can see what we're doing. Now bring the opacity of the solid 100. And now I'll create a keyframe here. And then in the second 3, I'll change the opacity to 0. And now, let's create the flickering effect. At this point in time, we can set the opacity to 0. Now I will move forward a little, and here I will bring the opacity back to 100. Move forward, opacity 0. Move forward, opacity 100. We can adjust the distance between the keyframes. Let's try to improve the effect. Zoom out a bit, using the mouse wheel while holding the Alt key. Let's increase the work area as well. And now, change the keyframes to easy ease using the F9 key. Let's see how it looks. The flicker we created doesn't feel fast enough. We can improve this animation. I'll stand here with the time indicator. Select all the opacity keyframes. Hold the Alt and Shift keys, and move the last keyframe to the time indicator. Let's see it again. It still doesn't feel fast. This time I will stand with the time indicator here, and move the keyframes again. Still not feeling fast enough. Okay, it seems that if I bring the keyframes here, it will look better. Yes, it looks better. That's the end of the lesson. See you at the next one.